If you can't finish your meal in a reasonable time, sir, we can always wrap it up for you, or have someone help you out." The words dropped like a plate onto concrete. Too loud, too sharp, too public. He didn't answer right away. His left hand hovered in the air, trembling slightly as he gripped the specialized fork. The steak before him was half-eaten, seasoned perfectly, untouched horseradish nestled beside it like an afterthought. His right hand, stiff, slightly curled, rested awkwardly on the edge of the table, fingers limp, unresponsive. He blinked slowly, not because he hadn't heard her, but because he had. Across from him, the young waitress stood just a little too close, her posture rehearsed, her smile forced into something professional, not mocking, but hollow. Behind her eyes, something urgent burned, not hatred, but haste. "This is just not the right night, Mr. Lerner," she added, voice lowered now, scanning the room. "We've got important guests coming. I hope you understand." He looked at her, not angry, not defensive, just tired, a man accustomed to disappearing. At the edge of the dining room, 3 men in marine dress blues paused their conversation. One reached for his glass, but stopped. Another tilted his head, narrowing his gaze. The third, the one in the middle, didn't move at all. He just watched. But someone else was watching. If you believe every veteran deserves respect, please subscribe, because every view helps this message reach those who need it most. Robert Lerner, 83, had been coming here every Friday for 6 years. He never made reservations. He never needed to. The staff had once known him by name. Some still did, quietly, respectfully, in passing. Others had come and gone, and to them he was just the old man in the corner booth. He didn't mind. Not really. As long as the corner was open, the horseradish sharp, and the ribeye cooked just slightly pink, that table, tucked under the framed print of the raising of the flag at Iwo Jima, was his place. Not sacred, but something close. The air around it smelled faintly of wood polish, grilled meat, and the subtle musk of older leather seats worn by years of elbows and elbows alone. He always slid in on the left side, so his bad leg could stretch a little without tripping servers. His cane leaned against the booth, not too far to reach, but never in anyone's way. He had come alone every time, but never without company. His company was a black and white photograph, laminated and yellowed at the edges. A woman, beautiful in a quiet mid-century way, frozen mid-laugh, her hand raised as if brushing back hair that wasn't out of place. He set her photo down gently, every time, leaning it against the salt shaker with precision, like the folding of a flag. His fork, customized, molded with a wider grip, rested on a thick paper napkin. He unwrapped it slowly, using his left hand. The right one, once dominant, now traitorous, remained close, but mostly symbolic. A hand that had once steadied a rifle, gripped the sides of helicopters, dragged bodies through mud, now trembled if he tried to button a collar. He hadn't come here for pity. He came for routine, for familiarity, for that first sip of water when it was still cold, the clink of ice, the scrape of the knife against a hot plate, the little things a man learns to savor when larger things have been lost. Tonight, something was different. The waitress wasn't new, Joan, her name tag said, but she had never served him before. Her smile was polite, professional, but there was a rhythm missing. No chat, no small courtesy. "No. Would you like me to bring your horseradish early like they used to? Just order, confirm, walk away, and something else." She kept looking over his shoulder. Her eyes ticked toward the host stand every few minutes. She stood straighter than most servers, her notepad tight to her chest, like a report waiting to be reviewed. Her heels clicked too sharply against the hardwood floor, out of sync with the otherwise casual rhythm of Kendall's grill house. Behind the bar, the manager stood with his arms folded. Gordon Finnegan, suited, smiling, scanning the room not for problems but for imperfections. He checked his watch, whispered something to a busboy, looked again at the entrance. Robert had no idea who they were expecting, didn't much care. He adjusted his fork. His left fingers trembled. He tried again, missed the grip. The fork slipped. It clattered to the floor beside his boot. A pause. Not in the room. In the man. He didn't bend. Not right away. His right leg would protest, and the back of his ribs, that old shrapnel pocket, now a phantom burn, would flare if he leaned too far without planning. So he waited, tried to slide the fork closer with his toe. Failed. Then reached, slow, methodical, the way a soldier learns to move when everything hurts and the mission doesn't care. His breath caught halfway down. From behind, he heard Joan approach. Her shoes stopped beside the booth. The fork was scooped up before he could say a word. "We really do need this table tonight," she said softly, her tone nearly apologetic now. Not to him, but to the situation. "It's a special evening." Robert blinked up at her. He didn't raise his voice, didn't protest. "I've been coming here longer than some of you have worked here." Joan hesitated. That touched something. Almost. But not enough. "And we value that," she said. "But tonight is different." He nodded. Once, slowly. Then turned back to his meal. He reached for his steak knife, the one still on the table. His left hand slipped slightly, catching the grip just a little too far down the handle. The edge bumped his knuckle. He winced, not because it hurt, but because he was tired of trying. The room buzzed around him. Glasses clinked. Ice machines hummed. Somewhere in the back, the grill hissed as fresh steaks hit the flames. All of it faded. A tunnel of sound collapsing around one point, the table in the corner, where a man who had seen death tried not to draw attention to the fact that he couldn't even cut his own food. Across the room, two men in suits chuckled softly. One of them nodded toward Robert and said something under his breath. The other shook his head, smirking. He shouldn't be out alone. Poor thing. Neither of them noticed the three Marines at the next table stop mid-conversation. One of them, the youngest, sat up straighter. The second leaned slightly in. The third, older and sharper-eyed, placed his water down without looking away from Robert. Joan approached again, this time holding a small to-go box and the check. "Sir," she said quietly, "I can help you package that up if you'd like." Robert didn't answer right away. His eyes were on the food. The steak he had only half touched, the horseradish still untouched. "No need," he said at last, voice low but clear. "I'm not done yet." Joan glanced at the clock, tension in her jaw. From across the room, Gordon gave her a nod. She stayed frozen for half a breath, then gave a tight smile and walked away. No one said anything. No one stood. Yet. The steak knife slipped from Robert's hand. It clattered against the plate, then skidded to the floor with a metallic scrape that seemed louder than it should have been. A few diners looked over briefly before turning back to their meals, but to Robert the sound rang in his ears like a rifle misfire in a silent field. He hesitated. His left leg shifted, knee stiff, dragging slightly as he prepared to lean down. Pain flickered in his hip, warning him not to push too far. His fingers hovered near the table's edge, bracing for the descent he knew he could not make gracefully. Before he could try, Joan appeared, swift and efficient. She scooped up the knife with a napkin pinched tight around the handle, as if the utensil itself carried contagion. Her face was calm, her smile unchanged, but the gesture landed heavy. It was not cruelty, but it was clean removal, the kind that left Robert feeling like the mess itself. "Mr. Lerner," she said in that low, practiced tone, "we really do need to turn this table. It's a critical guest tonight." Her voice wasn't sharp. That almost made it worse. She was performing kindness, but the undertone was undeniable. "You do not belong here tonight." Robert's jaw tightened. His pale eyes dropped to the tablecloth. For a moment, the air felt heavy in his lungs, as though he were back under the damp jungle canopy of a war he never fully left. He spoke slowly, deliberately, every word pressed with quiet weight. "I've been coming here longer than some of you have worked here." The nearby couple, the ones who had whispered before, went silent. One of them shifted uncomfortably in his seat, as if the words had brushed against their conscience. Joan softened for half a breath. She almost lowered her guard, but then her gaze flicked to the bar, where Gordon stood with his arms crossed, scanning the door, waiting for the important guest who would soon arrive. She straightened. "And we value that," she said quickly, with the rehearsed warmth of a hotel advertisement. "But tonight is different." She placed a to-go box on the edge of the table and set the folded check beside it. The paper's sharp corner rested near Robert's cane, an unspoken suggestion to finish. From across the room, a man in a tan sport coat shifted his chair. He had been watching quietly, and now he spoke just loud enough to carry. "He's not doing anything wrong." The room tilted for a second, tension pressing against the air. Robert's eyes didn't move, but Joan's did. She turned toward the man with the kind of polite expression servers wore when correcting a child. "Sir, please enjoy your meal," she said, crisp and smooth. "We'll take care of this." The man hesitated, lips parting as if to argue, then closed them again. He sat back down. The sound of his chair legs scraping the floor echoed longer than it should have. Robert didn't flinch. He lifted his napkin again, folding it with military precision, the crease sharp, the edges aligned. His fingers shook faintly, but he forced steadiness into the ritual. The Marines saw it all. The youngest Marine shifted in his seat, fists tightening on his knees. His chest rose with a deep inhale, but he said nothing. The second Marine leaned forward slightly, whispering under his breath, "This isn't right." The eldest, Staff Sergeant Avery Grant, didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on Robert. He studied the way Robert placed the napkin down with soldierly care, the way his shoulders squared even under pressure, the way his gaze stayed steady despite the subtle storm brewing around him. Grant had seen this posture before, not in restaurants, not in quiet towns, but in muddy fields, in burning hillsides, in places where men bore pain with silence because the mission demanded it. The restaurant's clamor pressed on. Glasses clinked. A birthday candle flickered at the far end of the dining room. But here, at the corner booth, a man who had given his body for his country sat under the polite pressure of being erased. And still, the old soldier didn't flinch. Robert reached for the napkin once more. The paper was thin, disposable, but he treated it like linen. His left hand trembled as he folded the edges into sharp lines, pressing them flat against the tabletop. The movements were slow, deliberate, a ritual carved into him long before the gray had touched his temples. To the casual eye, it was just an old man fussing with a napkin. To a Marine's eye, it was something else. It was discipline. It was ceremony. It was the same precision used in folding flags, the same control applied to weapons checks under rain and darkness. It was muscle memory that outlived strength. He placed the folded napkin beside his plate, straightened his knife and fork, aligning them as best he could despite the tremor. Then he took another bite of steak, chewing slowly, refusing to rush. The murmurs around him felt louder now. Silverware clinked in nervous rhythm. A chair scraped too hard against the floor. Somewhere, a child laughed, oblivious to the storm brewing in silence. Joan returned, standing straighter this time. Her smile stretched thinner, her patience sharpened by Gordon's stare from across the room. She leaned close, lowering her voice to something meant to sound sympathetic. "Mr. Lerner," she said carefully, "I know you come here often, but tonight we really do need this space. It would mean a lot if you could finish soon." Her words were smooth, practiced, wrapped in civility, but beneath them was the same message. "You don't belong here, not tonight." Robert looked up at her. His pale eyes were steady, unreadable. He did not argue. He did not plead. He did not explain the photograph by the salt shaker or the leg that ached every time he shifted in his seat. He simply lowered his gaze back to the plate, lifted his fork again, and cut another uneven bite of steak. There was no rebellion in it, no defiance, only dignity, and that was louder than shouting. At the nearby table, the Marines watched closer. The youngest leaned forward, jaw tight, hands flat against his knees as if bracing to rise. The second Marine whispered, "He's not moving. He's holding the line." Staff Sergeant Avery Grant said nothing. His eyes narrowed, studying. He saw the limp earlier when Robert shifted, saw the way his right wrist bent awkwardly, the hand stiff, fingers barely gripping. He saw the callus worn deep into the cane's handle, not from style but from years of necessity. And now he saw the discipline, the napkin, the posture, the refusal to let humiliation take even a fraction of his composure. Grant had known men like this, men who bore pain without spectacle, men who had been trained to stand fast when everything else broke, men who carried not just their own weight, but the weight of others who didn't make it home. Joan hesitated, caught between duty to her manager and the heavy silence radiating from the booth. For a fleeting second, her eyes softened. She almost said something different, but then she glanced back at Gordon. His jaw was set, his eyes sharp, his hand tapping impatiently against his wristwatch. She straightened, forced her smile again, and left. Robert exhaled slowly, steadying his hand before lifting the fork once more. He did not glance at the room. He did not ask for help. He chewed, he swallowed, he endured. The Marines exchanged a glance. Something unspoken passed between them, and in the eyes of one of those Marines, the decision was already made. But another uniform in the room had taken notice. The corner booth looked small compared to the broad man seated in it, cane against the wall, steak cooling on the plate. To most of the room, Robert Lerner was just another diner taking too long. To Staff Sergeant Avery Grant, he was something else entirely. Grant leaned back slightly in his chair, eyes narrowing. He had seen the limp when the old man shuffled in earlier. Not the kind of limp born from a weekend injury, not arthritis or the wear of time. No, this was something deeper, heavier. A gait shaped by shrapnel or bone that had once been shattered and never properly healed. His gaze shifted lower, to the cane resting against the booth. The handle was smoothed by years of use. The wood darkened where a palm had pressed down thousands of times. The base was worn unevenly, angled slightly as if compensating for imbalance. That kind of wear didn't come from occasional use. It came from survival. Then he watched the hand. The right one, stiff and resistant, hovering but not functional. The wrist bent unnaturally, the fingers slow to respond. When the knife slipped earlier, the man hadn't even tried to catch it. Not weakness, not hesitation, nerve damage. Grant had seen it before, in men who carried fragments of war still buried inside their bodies. He leaned toward the Marine on his left, voice low enough not to carry beyond their table. "See his gait? Right leg's gone. Cane shows years of weight bearing. And the hand, radial nerve damage, probably shrapnel." The younger Marine followed his gaze, his expression tightening. "Shrapnel?" Grant nodded once. Or worse. The third Marine, older than the second but younger than Grant, exhaled slowly. His jaw flexed. He had seen this kind of injury too. He knew what it meant, the price behind it. At that moment, Joan returned again, her tray balanced with practiced ease, her smile sharpened by tension. She set down a to-go bag on the table beside Robert, her hand resting against the folded check-like punctuation. "Mr. Lerner," she said, her voice almost soothing now. "We really must insist. Please." Robert's eyes lifted to hers. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he turned his gaze back to the plate, as though the steak was the only battlefield worth holding. Grant's chest tightened. He could feel the room closing in, the quiet hum of injustice turning into something tangible. He hadn't come here tonight to fight. He hadn't come to be anyone's savior. He'd just wanted a meal with his brothers. But now, watching an old soldier's dignity be trimmed down to fit someone else's schedule, he straightened slightly, shoulders squaring. His glass of water remained untouched. His hand lowered from the table to rest on his thigh. His jaw set. He hadn't planned to intervene. But then he stood. Grant pushed his chair back. The legs scraped softly against the hardwood floor, a sound so ordinary it should have been lost under the clatter of dishes and hum of conversation. But in that moment, the sound carried. Heads turned. Conversations paused. The staff sergeant stood tall. His dress blues caught the low light, the polished brass buttons glinting faintly, as if they had been waiting for this exact moment to shine. He adjusted his jacket with a single sharp tug, then walked with steady steps toward the corner booth. Robert did not look up. He was still focused on his plate, still methodically cutting with the imperfect grip of his left hand, the tremor in his wrist betraying him more with every movement. Grant reached the table. He didn't speak at first. He bent down, reached beneath the booth and retrieved the steak knife that had slipped earlier. With deliberate care, he pulled a white napkin from the dispenser and wiped the blade clean, as if restoring something sacred. Then he set it down on Robert's table with precision, the tip aligned perfectly against the edge of the plate. "This man hasn't finished his meal." The words were calm, measured, not loud, but they carried like a command. The air shifted. Diners stopped mid-bite. A fork clinked against a plate somewhere in the back. Joan froze, tray still balanced on her palm, her mouth half open as if to form a response, but no words arriving. Her eyes flicked instinctively toward the bar. Gordon Finnegan was already moving. He smoothed his tie, forced a smile across his face, and walked toward the booth with the confident stride of a man used to putting out small fires before they grew. "Let's not make a scene," Gordon said, voice honeyed, his hand spreading open as though to calm invisible waters. Grant didn't move. His voice was low, even. "We're not." He gestured lightly toward Robert. "We're just making sure he gets to eat." The other two Marines had risen now as well. They walked silently across the room, boots clicking softly against the floorboards, and positioned themselves near the booth. Not crowding, not threatening, just standing, tall, present. Their uniforms were statement enough. The room, once filled with chatter, seemed to draw in its breath. Robert finally looked up. His eyes moved from the knife to Grant, then to the two Marines flanking behind. No words, just recognition. Gordon hesitated, his smile faltering for the first time. He glanced at Joan, whose hands clutched the tray a little too tightly now. She looked back at him, with the helplessness of someone caught between orders and conscience. The Marines did not raise their voices. They did not shout. They did not posture. They simply stood as guardians of a man who had been quietly diminished all evening. And for the first time that night, the restaurant went quiet. The restaurant was silent now, though no one had announced it so. The hush had crept across the floor like a tide, swallowing clinking glasses and stray laughter, until all that remained was the weight of 3 uniforms standing guard over a man who had been asked to disappear. Robert's fork lowered slowly to the plate. He looked up at last, his pale eyes meeting the gaze of the Marine in front of him. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to that single line of sight, an old soldier staring into the face of one much younger, yet marked by the same discipline, the same quiet fire. Grant did not speak. He did not need to. His posture was straight, his expression calm, his eyes steady with a kind of recognition that only a soldier could give. He had seen this before, though never in this exact man. He had seen it in the tilt of shoulders beneath a rucksack, in the set of a jaw beneath falling shells, in the way men carried themselves long after the battlefield was gone. Robert inhaled slowly, his chest lifting with effort. And then he asked a question so simple it seemed almost out of place. "You spotted the limp?" Grant's mouth curved faintly at one corner, not into a smile, but into something deeper. Acknowledgement. He inclined his head. "And the arm." "Took some nerve damage myself once. Hard to miss." Robert gave a low chuckle, gravel in his throat, the sound worn but honest. It was the first warmth he had shown all night. His hand brushed absently against his cane, the carved eagle's head gleaming dully in the light. "The jungle didn't like me much," Robert said, his tone caught between humor and memory. His words hung in the air like smoke, curling into places unspoken. Around them, people shifted in their seats. A woman covered her mouth softly with her hand. A man near the door straightened in his chair, unsure whether to stand or remain seated. Even Joan, still clutching her tray against her chest, blinked as if suddenly seeing the old veteran for the first time, not as an obstacle to clear, but as someone entirely other, someone heavy with history. Gordon's forced smile faltered further. His eyes darted between Robert and the Marines, between the quiet booth and the entrance where the important guest had yet to arrive. His tie suddenly felt too tight, his collar too stiff. But Robert didn't look at Gordon. He didn't look at Joan. He didn't even glance around at the dozens of eyes resting on him now. His gaze remained fixed on Grant, and in that gaze was a message neither needed to speak aloud. I see you. I know you. We are cut from the same cloth. The youngest Marine shifted slightly, his breath catching in his throat, as though the simple exchange had unlocked a truth he hadn't known he was waiting for. The second Marine nodded once, sharp and respectful, as if saluting in silence. And still, no one else spoke. The room was waiting, watching, knowing instinctively that something important had just begun. And then came the memory. Grant lowered his voice so that at first it was meant only for Robert. But the hush in the room carried it outward until every ear strained to catch the words. You were there, Grant said softly. Hamburger Hill. Robert's eyes, pale and steady, flickered just for an instant. A memory stirred behind them, sharp enough to cut. He nodded once, slow and deliberate, as if confirming a fact long buried. 69, he said, the number carrying more weight than any year should. We lost the ridge twice, took it back bleeding. The hill drank more blood than rain that season. He stopped, his lips pressing together, the fork in his hand resting midair. His voice, when it returned, was lower, rougher. I had a busted leg. Mortar caught me mid-evac, tore through my hip and shoulder. Arm never came back right after that. The room was frozen. Even Joan, still gripping her tray like a shield, forgot the weight of Gordon's eyes boring into her from the bar. Robert's gaze lowered to the table, to the plate before him, as though the steak were gone, and all he saw now was the mud of that hillside. It wasn't the bullets that hurt, he said, the words heavy, measured, his voice almost breaking. It was hearing the boys scream and not being fast enough. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one shifted in their seats. No one lifted a glass. Even the hiss of the kitchen grills seemed to quiet, as if the building itself had stopped to listen. Grant's jaw tightened. He nodded once, sharp, respectful. You carried them anyway, he said. Robert exhaled, eyes still lowered. Didn't carry enough. The simple confession cracked something invisible in the room. The two Marines behind Grant straightened instinctively, as if standing at attention not for their staff sergeant, but for the man in the booth. A woman at a nearby table blinked hard, her hand pressed to her lips. A man in a business suit lowered his eyes, ashamed of his earlier smirk. Even Joan felt the sting, her ambition melting into something she had not expected to feel that night. Remorse. Robert lifted his fork again, slowly, with the trembling discipline of a man who had never allowed himself to break in front of others. He placed another bite into his mouth, chewing carefully, as though proving to himself that he could still finish what he started. And in that act, small as it was, the entire room understood. The man in the corner booth was not a burden. He was the reason burdens had been lifted from others. He was not slow. He was surviving. He was not forgotten. He was the living memory of every name left carved into stone. And now, everyone watching knew it. Gordon Finnegan had been frozen by the bar, one hand still resting against the polished counter, the other tugging absently at the knot of his tie. For most of the evening he had worn the mask of authority, the easy smile, the sharp posture, the quiet dominance of a man who believed he controlled the rhythm of his dining room. Now that mask cracked. He looked at the three Marines, their presence cutting through the air like sharpened steel, silent but unmovable. He looked at Joan, still standing stiffly with her tray pressed against her stomach, her eyes lowered, cheeks flushed with something caught between shame and realization. And then he looked at Robert Lerner. The old man had returned to his meal. Not out of ignorance, not to dismiss what had been said, but because that was what men like him did. They endured. They finished what was in front of them, one bite at a time, whether it was food on a plate or fire on a hill. For a moment, Gordon considered holding firm, brushing it off, smoothing it over, waiting for the senator's arrival to wash away this interruption. But he could feel the weight of the room pressing against him. The eyes of every diner were not on him, not on Joan, not even on the Marines. They were on Robert. The truth was laid bare. Gordon had not been running a restaurant tonight. He had been trying to stage a performance, and the cost of that performance had been a man who had given more than any of them could imagine. His throat tightened. His steps forward were slow, measured, as though each one dragged a chain behind it. He stopped at Robert's table. For the first time that evening, his smile was gone. "Mr. Lerner," Gordon said, his voice carrying across the hush, "I owe you an apology. We failed you tonight." Robert looked up, his fork halfway to his mouth. His eyes did not soften. They did not flare. They simply looked, steady and quiet, as if waiting to see if the words meant anything at all. Gordon swallowed. He turned slightly, raising his voice for the staff and the diners alike. "From this night forward, no veteran will ever be rushed out of this restaurant again. They will be welcomed. They will be honored. And if anyone, staff or guest, fails to remember that, they will answer to me." The words fell hard, final, echoing off the wood-paneled walls. He paused, then looked at the Marines. His voice lowered slightly, but still carried. "And thank you, gentlemen. You reminded us what this place stands for." One of the younger Marines inclined his head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, but their silence remained their answer. It was Robert they stood for, not Gordon. Joan's chest rose sharply, her tray trembling against her grip. She lowered it slowly to her side, her lips pressed tight. Her eyes moved to Robert, but she could not bring herself to speak. The room exhaled as though it had been holding its breath all along. Diners shifted, many of them bowing their heads or staring into their plates, with a shame they did not expect to feel when they walked in that night. But among them, a new current moved, one of reverence. Robert took another bite of his steak. His hand trembled faintly, but his jaw was steady. He did not nod at Gordon. He did not respond to the proclamation. He did not need to. The transformation had already begun, but this was only the beginning. 7 days later, Kendall's Grill House carried the same Friday hum, the sizzle of steaks, the buzz of conversation, the soft glow of lamps reflecting off varnished wood. Yet something intangible had shifted. The air was gentler somehow, as if the building itself remembered. The door opened, and Robert Lerner stepped inside. His cane struck the floor with its familiar rhythm, the carved eagle's head gleaming faintly under the entry light. His gait was slow, uneven, but there was no hesitation. He had walked this path for years, but tonight, the weight on his shoulders was lighter. The host, not a stranger this time, but a young man with sleeves rolled neatly at his forearms, greeted him with a warmth that was genuine, not rehearsed. "Good evening, Mr. Lerner. Your table is ready." No menu was offered, no hesitation, just respect. He was guided to his corner booth, the one beneath the framed photograph of the flag at Iwo Jima. But now there was something new. A small brass plaque, polished to a gentle shine, affixed to the wooden backrest. The letters were simple, unadorned, yet heavy with meaning, in honor of quiet sacrifice, reserved Fridays. Robert paused, his weathered hand brushing the plaque as if testing its reality. He eased into the booth, set his cane in its familiar place, and withdrew the photograph from his jacket pocket. His wife's smile looked up at him once more, as it always did. He leaned it against the salt shaker with care, aligning it perfectly. From the kitchen, Joan emerged carrying a tray. Her steps were slower than usual, measured, lacking the brisk sharpness of before. She approached the table with her eyes lowered, then raised them with effort. "Ribeye, medium, extra horseradish," she said softly, placing the plate before him. There was no smile stretched too tight, no urgency hidden behind her voice, only sincerity. She did not linger, but as she set the glass of water beside the plate, her hand rested against the table's edge for a moment longer than necessary. A wordless apology, humble and unfinished. Robert nodded once. It was not forgiveness, not entirely, but acknowledgement. That was enough. The door opened again. 3 men entered, not in dress blues this time, but in plain clothes. Their shoulders were still unmistakable, squared, strong, carried with the ease of men who knew where they belonged. The Marines found a table near Robert's booth. They did not speak to him right away. They simply sat, their presence like a silent promise. Robert unfolded his napkin, steadying the tremor in his left hand as he placed it across his lap. The steak knife rested beside his plate, clean and ready. He lifted it slowly, cutting into the ribeye with the kind of deliberate precision that had carried him through a lifetime. At a table across the room, a boy no older than 8 stared. His eyes were wide, curious. His father nudged him gently, but the boy straightened in his seat, his small hand lifting to his forehead in a salute he must have learned from movies or school. Robert saw it. He paused, then lifted his hand from the table. The fingers curled stiffly, but the motion was crisp. His salute was slow, dignified, perfect. The boy grinned, dropping his hand, bouncing slightly in his chair with pride.
His father looked down, swallowing hard, his own hand resting gently on his son's shoulder. The restaurant returned to its rhythm. Plates clinked. Conversations rose again. But at the corner booth, something eternal lingered. A tradition reborn, not in ceremony, not in fanfare, but in quiet respect that would ripple far beyond one night. Robert ate his meal, his wife's photograph smiling up at him. The Marines sat nearby, steady as ever.
And for the first time in a long time, he did not feel invisible. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you are watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.